High in the shadowed folds of the Appalachian Mountains, where the ridges swallowed sound and the valleys held secrets older than memory, there lived a boy named Jonah Pike. His name was barely spoken in the valley below, and when it came in hushed tones, carried with unease. Jonah was first seen wandering near an abandoned logging trail, pale as if sunlight had forgotten him, thin as if hunger clung to his bones. He looked no older than 12, yet his eyes carried a weight beyond his years, dark, watchful, and strangely hollow. He lived alone in a sagging cabin deep in the woods, a place where no family remained, where no laughter of kin ever echoed. No one knew how he survived. No father was spoken of, no mother came to claim him, and yet Jonah endured silent, self-contained, a child shaped by the wilderness itself. But it was not his solitude that unsettled the valley folk. It was what he carried with him wherever he went. Jonah Pike was never without a doll. Sometimes one, sometimes several tucked beneath his arms or tied to a string at his belt. Strange dolls, crudely stitched from rags, stuffed with straw and hair, their faces sewn with uncanny care. As the years passed, whispers spread that Jonah did not have one or two dolls, but hundreds. A collection so vast it filled the walls of his lonely home. 200 figures, silent companions that stared back at him with button eyes and crooked smiles, standing where a family should have been. He never played with the other children, never lingered in the company of townsfolk. He only returned to his cabin in the mountains, carrying his companions with him, guarding them as if they were his kin. To Jonah Pike, the dolls were not toys. They were something else, something he needed, something he loved, something the valley folk dared not name. In time, questions grew around the strange collection Jonah Pike guarded so fiercely. Each doll was different, each bearing its own peculiar detail, as though stitched with a memory. Some wore tiny scraps of fabric that looked aged and familiar, while others seemed to carry human hair, braided into their heads with unsettling care. When pressed by curious townsfolk, Jonah would only give the same answer. They were gifts, he said. No explanation beyond that. No word of who gave them, or why. The boy never spoke of carving or sewing them himself, yet new dolls appeared in his possession, one after another, until their number swelled into the hundreds. The valley folk began to weave their own stories to explain what they could not understand. Some believed Jonah's mother had crafted them for him before she vanished, leaving the dolls as a comfort for her son's loneliness. Others claimed the dolls had nothing to do with her at all, that they simply appeared, as if the mountain itself left them at Jonah's door. And then came the darker whispers. People noticed that after every accident, every sudden death in the valley, Jonah seemed to have a new doll. When a farmer's child drowned in the river, a doll with a blue ribbon appeared at Jonah's cabin. When a hunter was found crushed beneath a fallen tree, Jonah carried a figure with a flannel scrap stitched across its chest. Each loss in the valley seemed mirrored by the arrival of another doll. The boy offered no answers, only silence. And in that silence, fear took root. To the valley, the dolls were no longer toys, no longer harmless. They were omens, markers of death, and each one carried with it the shadow of someone who had once lived. As Jonah Pike's collection grew, so too did the unease of the valley. Hunters who passed near his cabin told of strange sounds that drifted from within, voices, not just one but many, rising and falling as though a gathering were taking place behind those crooked walls. Yet when the hunters drew closer, the voices fell silent, leaving only the creak of the trees and the rustle of wind. It was not only the cabin that fed the fear. From time to time, a doll would appear where it did not belong. Perched on a fence post, left at the edge of a barn, or found sitting on a doorstep with button eyes staring blankly ahead. Those who discovered them spoke of dread that lingered for days, for misfortune often followed. A sick cow, a sudden fever, a death in the family. Before long, the valley came to believe that finding one of Jonah's dolls meant death would soon darken the door. Children were warned to keep their distance. Mothers pulled their little ones closer whenever Jonah appeared in town. His pale frame stooped beneath the weight of the dolls he carried. Some whispered prayers under their breath as he passed, as though warding off an unseen curse. Yet no matter how the valley shunned him, fascination clung to their fear. People wondered how he lived alone in those mountains, how he survived winters without help, and what bound him so fiercely to the hundreds of lifeless figures he guarded. Was he simply a lonely boy abandoned by the world, or something the mountain itself had claimed, a keeper of spirits who walked among the living with his silent companions? Whatever the truth, the name Jonah Pike became more than a boy's name. It became a warning, a whispered tale passed from one mouth to another, until his dolls were no longer rags and buttons, but symbols of death itself. Fear alone could not keep the valley folk from their curiosity. One day, a traveling preacher, bold in his conviction, chose to climb the mountain and see for himself what truth hid behind the whispers. He returned with a tale so dreadful that the valley would never forget it. Inside Jonah Pike's cabin, the walls were lined from floor to ceiling with shelves, and upon those shelves sat nearly 200 dolls. They filled the room like a congregation, every crooked head turned toward the door, every stitched face locked in silence. Some wore bonnets, some bore crude spectacles, others had scraps of coats and ribbons sewn into their tiny bodies. Each one was crafted with uncanny familiarity, as though copied from memory, but the horror lay not in their number, nor in their arrangement, it was in their resemblance. For the preacher swore that every doll mirrored someone who had died in the valley. The drowned girl with the blue ribbon. The hunter with the red flannel. The old widow whose hair was braided long in silver. Every loss the valley had mourned now stared back from Jonah Pike's shelves with button eyes and stitched mouths, and there was more. Some of the dolls carried hair too real to be dismissed, strands that gleamed with the color of the departed, locks far too human to be mistaken for thread. The preacher whispered that the boy did not sew dolls, he captured souls, binding them into fabric and straw, trapping the dead in forms they could never escape. When this tale spread through the valley, terror settled like fog. No longer was Jonah Pike a strange, lonely child. He became something other, a vessel of the mountain's darkest will. His dolls were no longer seen as toys, but as prisons of the dead, silent witnesses to a secret no one dared confront. The winter that swallowed Jonah Pike came without warning. Heavy snow fell early, burying the mountain trails and sealing the ridge in silence. Weeks passed with no sign of him in the valley, no pale figure carrying his companions down from the hills. Some whispered relief, others unease, for absence did not feel like freedom, it felt like the calm before something worse. When spring thawed the slopes, a small band dared to climb to his cabin. What they found was not ruin, but order, and order that chilled the blood. The boy was gone, yet every doll remained. 200 figures, arranged in perfect rows, sitting shoulder to shoulder, their button eyes fixed on the doorway as though waiting. Dust lay thick, but the dolls seemed untouched by time, their colors vivid, their forms too sharp for neglect. No sign of Jonah could be found. No footprints, no bones, no trace of struggle. The hearth was cold, the bed neatly made, and the dolls sat as if placed there with care the moment before he vanished. Some claimed they heard a whisper in that cabin, faint as wind through a keyhole, as though the dolls themselves were speaking. From that day forward, the valley avoided the place. A few brave souls returned to find the dolls shifting, never where they had been left, their faces turned in new directions, their hands moved as if in mockery of life. It was said that Jonah had not truly vanished, but joined them, that the boy himself had become part of his collection, and still, from time to time, a doll appeared far from the cabin. Perched on a stone by the river. Resting on the steps of a farmhouse. Left on a fence in the middle of the night. Wherever they turned up, sorrow followed. Illness, accident, death. The dolls lingered as harbingers, and Jonah Pike's absence became more terrifying than his presence ever had been years past, and Jonah Pike's name slipped from the lips of the living into the whispers of folklore. The cabin rotted into the soil, its roof caving, its walls sinking into the earth, yet the dolls were never found scattered or destroyed. Some swore they still lingered within the ruins, untouched by weather or time, their stitched faces staring out through broken beams. Travelers moving through the high ridges told of finding dolls where no hand should have placed them. One on a moss-covered stump, another set gently upon a riverbank, its button eyes gazing into the current. Families who discovered a doll near their homes came to dread the days that followed, for death or sickness often arrived soon after. The dolls had become omen's silent messengers of misfortune, but the most haunting stories were those of the boy himself. Some claimed to have seen him long after his disappearance, a pale figure drifting barefoot among the pines, carrying a single doll in his arms. He never spoke, never turned his head, only walked with the stillness of a shadow. Those who followed said he vanished into the trees, leaving only the faint sound of many voices, murmuring just beyond hearing. In the valley below, Jonah Pike became less a memory and more a legend, a tale mothers told their children to keep them close at night. A boy who had lived alone with 200 dolls, each one a vessel of the dead, each one waiting with button eyes for the living to join them, and in the silence of the Appalachian hills, where grief hangs heavy and death lingers long, the story endures of the child who never truly was alone, and the dolls that outlasted him, watching, waiting, always waiting.